Okay. Hi, my name is Paul. Thank you to Carlos for having me today, and thank you to List for hosting. Absolutely fantastic venue, and great that this is started again. So I'm sure Carlos, I'm a co-organizer of London Gophers. I'm sure Carlos would actually, if anyone wants to get involved, gladly accept any help, because these things don't just happen. So thank you very much for making this happen. I'm going to talk to you today about Vim and Go and how the two meet. And we're going to talk a bit about a bit of history and Vim's relationship with Go, the language. We're going to introduce Go Please, which is a new language server. And thank you to Tomasz for effectively setting up so well my talk. I couldn't actually have asked someone to introduce it any better, so thanks for that. Introduce govim, which is a new Go development plugin for Vim 8. Which is backed by Go Please, the language server, and see some demos. And we're also going to cover some sort of architectural bits and pieces of how all this stuff ties together. So every year, the Go language community runs a survey of its users, which tries to look at trends of what's actually going on. And one of the questions, which is perhaps the most hotly anticipated, is, of course, what is your preferred editor? So again, Tomasz, exactly as you said, the IDEs are becoming more popular because actually they can do a hell of a lot more. And even in languages like Go, where it's not critical to have a debugger, some people prefer it. And so that IDE type experience becomes a sort of a key selling point. Visual Studio Code has just been doing fantastically over the last few years, largely because it is so cross-language. It is natively supported, it has native support, for a language server, and we'll come on to that in a second, in lots of different languages. It's relatively easy to write plugins in TypeScript, blah, blah, blah. So Visual Studio Code going really well. Goland is sort of an IntelliJ-based product, which is like a Go-specific version of IntelliJ. Again, that's much more Visual Studio weight, as opposed to Visual Studio Code, which has a lighter feel. Vim, unfortunately, has seen a bit of a decline over the 3 years, as you can see, and I think that's largely because the other editors, particularly Visual Studio Code and Goland, have started getting these features and sort of becoming a bit more rich. But that's also, I think, a large part because Go's user base as well is just seeing a massive increase. So you've got a lot more people who are newcomers to the language, and Visual Studio Code, if you're a newcomer to programming full stop, is just something that's a lot easier to pick up and get going with. So I think that's predominantly one of the reasons that Visual Studio Code is sort of taking share away from Vim, if you like. So just a bit of history about Vim and its relationship with Go. Go is not specific to any editor, sort of unsurprisingly. And what I've done here is just include the images here from the most popular editors on the previous slide here, as far as the current year is concerned. So very basically, when Go 1 first came out, there was no tooling, no massive tooling around the language itself. It was just a case of writing .go files and then compiling them. And even the process of compiling Go in the first few years was actually fairly tiresome. But that's massively improved now. So then what started to happen was that editors started to interact with various tools that were designed to work with the language. Now, I'm not sure if anybody's written any Go here. There's one or two folks that I recognize who have done. But things like gofmt is there in order to just automatically format your source files, for example. Go code exists in order to help provide completions, and that's something that Tomasz talked about. We'll look at that in a second. Go imports. Go has the concept of importing a package in order to then be able to refer to exported identifiers from that package. So Go imports is a way of automatically saying, oh, I don't recognize what's going on here, but it looks like you're referring to this package here, and automatically adding the import line at the top. Go Lint, unsurprisingly, it's like a linting tool. Static check is a huge suite of static analyses that can be then run over your Go code. So you can start to see editors then had a bit of a job on their hands, because actually there were lots of tools that the editors were needing to interact with in some way, shape or form. Wasn't particularly clean. So things started to get a bit messy, unsurprisingly, for a number of reasons. The plugin developers who are writing plugins for these different editors, Vim, Emacs, sort of go to the old school editors, if you like. they were having to interface with all of these tools. And guess what? They didn't all have the same type of command line flags, didn't have the same type of error handling. It starts to get fairly messy if you've got 10 plus tools. Someone's got to install them. What version do you install? You can sort of see. So there's an inconsistency on so many different levels there from the plugin developer's perspective. But then there's also no consistent experience between editors. If you're a newcomer to the language, you're like, well, hang on, this works very differently in Emacs than Visual Studio Code, if you take something simple as formatting code, for example. So then there's no consistent user experience on top of that either. And you've also got on top of that the fact that, well, someone might just think, had enough of supporting that tool now, and it just sort of dies. Or the plugin writer for the editor also just thinks, I've had enough of that. So there's no continuity within the community of actually sort of supporting this whole ecosystem. It's also very slow and inefficient as well. If we just go back to the list of these tools here, most of these tools are at least going to parse Go code. Now, parsing is relatively quick, but if you're doing anything beyond just syntax analysis or syntax checking, then you're going to be type checking the code and potentially type checking more than just a single package as well. You could be doing something as complex as a whole program analysis. So if each of these tools is parsing, each of these tools is type checking, you sort of start to see where the story gets a bit messy and complicated as well. So plenty of problems with this approach. And this is where Go Please, and just generally, because Go Please is effectively an instance of a language server protocol server. Go Please is supported actually by the Go Tools team, a part of Google in New York, and Rebecca and Ian have largely been the authors of Go Please, but it's backed by a whole load of other sort of key tooling packages that are also written by the tools team in New York. There's a lot of community involvement as well, but it's great that actually there's like a sort of a cornerstone team who are maintaining and looking after this. So the language server protocol there defines the protocol between an editor or IDE and a language server that provides language features like autocomplete, etc., etc. And that, as was kindly introduced earlier on, is all it is. It's effectively a specification for how an editor can talk to a server. And there are capabilities on either side. The server has some capabilities, and the client, i.e. the editor in this situation, has some capabilities as well. The language server documentation is actually relatively good, although unless you're looking at a specific language server, it might seem a bit abstract and dry, which is why it pays to actually take a particular language and therefore a particular language server, and you think, oh yeah, now I sort of kind of get what it means in TypeScript, for example. So then this is what the picture starts to look at when we have Go Please, which is the Go language, the new Go language server and editors. Is that the specification for all editors is the same, i.e. they talk to the language server in exactly the same way. And notice I haven't got any more of the boxes indicating the different tools that exist as well now. Because the idea is, in theory, that these editors just talk to the one process. And we'll come on to how they talk to that process in a second. They don't need to worry, that's only one integration they need to worry about. And so you can get your integration with the language server, which, guess what, follows a spec. So regardless of the language you're writing in, the communication between editor and whatever language server you're interested in will be the same. So this is a really good thing from the perspective of editors, and it will solve a lot of these problems that we talked about earlier on. It massively improves the development effort as well, whether that's the plugin editor plugin writer, i.e. you're only having to talk to a language server now, and there's a specification for how you talk to it. Perfect, tick. Consistent approach to adding new features as well, as in the language servers do things like completion, etc., but they're not, it's not sort of a closed wall. There are specifications that describe how you can add things to a language server as well. Much improved consistent user experience as well, because guess what, all these editors can now do the same things because they're able to do these things via the language server, and the protocol over which you're talking is well defined. The features on the other side are well defined as well. So it's much more consistent, better coordination as well. And it's much faster and more efficient because you're only talking to one process now. Guess what? If you can actually arrange within that process to only parse a file a single time and then reuse that, sort of ignoring any perhaps mutation concerns along the way, then you're in a vastly better place, particularly when it comes to things like type checking as well. And we'll see that in a second. So with Go Please in place here, this is where I thought, well, actually, I enjoy writing Go, and I would prefer not to have to write my Vim plugins in Vim script because I'm horrendous at Vim and horrendous at Vim script. But I'm not too bad. I was about to say pretty good at Go there. I won't go that far. I'm not too bad at Go. So let me see if I can actually write Vim plugins in Go. And in order to do that, I need to actually write something that allows me to write these plugins in Go. So I wrote that sort of support package, if I can call it that. And then I thought, well, let me write govim, which is a Go development plugin. So this is when I'm writing Go code today, I have govim as my development plugin, and it is the thing that is talking to gopls, the language server. Now, it's actually a very, very simple interface, as I said, to the language server, and it has all these features like hover, format on save, code completion, go to definition, quick fix diagnostics, and we'll take a look at that in a second. It's in a sort of fairly early stage now, but it is very usable. I'm using it 100% of the time. So, good question is, well, there's probably plenty of language server plugin and language agnostic plugins that already exist for Vim, and there must have been some sort of incumbent Vim plugin for Go development as well. Well, there was, and it is called Vim Go, and it's hugely popular, over 10,000 stars on GitHub. There are equally a large number of just language agnostic language server plugins for Go. coc.nvim is one, for example. Keep going, there's a whole load of them. And they're absolutely fine as well. So you're thinking, well, hang on, why on earth did you write govim in the first place then, if there are all these plugins that actually exist? Well, it was just testing the hypothesis in the first place that actually it would be easier to write Vim plugins in Go than Vim script. So that was my primary hypothesis that I was testing with all of this. I think I've sort of convinced myself that I actually still prefer writing Go even for Vim plugins. So I've sort of gave myself a little tick for that one there. But also the idea was that it would make for much more readable and maintainable plugins as well. And if you've written any Go code, you might have sort of reached the same sort of conclusion that I think of. I can sort of pick up Mike's Go code, and if he's not writing assembly, I can read the Go code, and actually that's the whole benefit, is that anyone can pick up somebody else's Go code, and it's very, very idiomatic. I don't have that feeling with Vim script. I struggle to even write Vim script, let alone read somebody else's Vim script. So again, this is the idea, is that if actually we can create some sort of plugin that is written in Go that is language agnostic, talking to a language server in some way, shape or form, if there are any problems with the plugin itself, well, then we've got a much larger pool of people who can actually contribute to fixing things. But anyway, this point is talked about a bit more on the FAQ because it's an absolutely critical one. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Vim Go, coc.nvim. They are vastly more mature, but this was just testing this very specific hypothesis here. But it seems to be working pretty well. So upcoming features in govim, full gopls support. Well, as stuff is added to the Go language server, it will just very easily be made available within govim, as it would within coc.nvim, for example, or any of the existing plugins that can already talk language server. If anybody is interested in giving Go, please do. I'd appreciate any feedback, issues, PRs, whatever it might be. And so without further ado, I'm going to quickly skip to a demo here. So I'm using gvim for my demo here. I don't actually use gvim, I just use Vim in the terminal, but for a demo it's just a bit nicer and easier on the eye. So I'm actually in the, where am I here? Yeah, I'm actually in the root here is for the govim code itself. So let me just open up a particular file here. So with the mouse we get the hover information, which is just giving us in this situation the signature for the function in this case. Hopefully you can just about see the hover information there. And so what's going on here is that hover detail is being provided by gopls, the language server. So everything that govim can do is driven by the language server. It really is just a pass-through in that respect. There's nothing clever going on. So then we can jump to definition. I'm using click and then control and left click in order to jump to definition, and then control T to jump back. And the speed here with which I'm jumping through. So this is very similar to like the C tags concept of jumping to a definition, but instead of using a tags file here, we're actually relying on the language server. So it's telling us exactly where to jump to here. It's giving us all the answers. This plugin is not at all clever. Let's just do some, I'll just erase this line here. Completion. So fumpt is a package that I've imported at the top here, so therefore I'm able to do fumpt.print and then do the omni complete, which is Control-X-O. And that brings up a list of options here. So let me just say I want to do hello, oops, like in Vim London. And then within the printf function here, I've used that %v, which is a verb here, which means that I really need to pass in an extra argument to this print function here. And using the quick fix window, I can actually be told by, again, the language server if there's any problems in my code here. And I've just opened the quick fix window there, and I've got a keyboard shortcut to do it. And it says, sure enough, the printf format %v reads one argument, but has actually got 0 in the call. So let me just fix that. And there we go, the actual error has disappeared from the quick fix window as well. And this is, again, all happening by communicating with the language server. So let me just close down the quick fix window there. I've just added some blank lines in here. And very pleasingly, Go doesn't like blank lines like that. So when I save the file, it's going to format those and just erase them all. Okay, which is nice. And then the one other thing I was going to demo is that, let me just take out, for example, an import that I have at the top here. Nothing particularly clever is that when I then save the file again, it spots this go imports equivalent functionality is saying, oh, actually, you know what, you're referencing os dot, and I forget what it is within here. You need to have imported os. Let me add the import back in for you there. I think that's it as far as the demo is concerned, actually. So let me just quickly skip back to the presentation. So that's the GitHub URL for the actual plugin itself. All you need is a relatively recent version of Vim, but that's pretty well documented on the README, and a version 1.12 at least of Go installed, but then it'll just take it all from there for you. So just to briefly look at the architecture that's behind these various bits and pieces going on here, with a quick recap on Vim 8 channels to start with. So channels came in Vim 8 as a way of talking to external processes in an asynchronous way in Vim, or potentially asynchronous way. And channel is effectively an abstraction over a socket or a pipe. Jobs can be used. This concept of a job came in Vim 8 as well to start processes and then communicate with them over a socket or a pipe. And there are various different protocols, if I can call them that can be used over the socket or the pipe to communicate with this external process here. Unsurprisingly, JSON is one of the more popular because it is so generic. Link to the help information there. I'll make these slides available at the end, incidentally. So the architecture is actually really, really simple. With govim as a process, because that's what it is, sitting in the middle there, it's a Go binary that is just running. It's started by Vim on the left, so when Vim starts up, it starts govim via a job, talking to it over a channel. Could be a pipe or a socket, doesn't really matter. I use pipes most of the time. And then govim actually says, well, fine, actually, you know what, I need the Go language server, Go please running, so let me start a Go language server instance, and it does. And it's also talking over pipes, but just so happens that JSON RPC is the defined protocol that those two talk to each other. So this is the very simple architecture between these three processes that end up running. For now, you get one govim instance per Vim instance, and one Go please instance per govim instance. So it's 1 to 1 to 1 for now. That isn't set in stone at all, and it's just, will the Go please guys at some point change that in order to, but there are a number of reasons that becomes quite complicated. And similarly, I could fall in line if I wanted you to have a single govim instance, but really govim is going to be a very light pass-through, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. So all of this stuff is actually automated. There are automated tests for absolutely everything that govim supports, which are effectively a way of just ensuring that within Vim, everything the language server says that it can do can be surfaced and actually used by a user in Vim as well. So because I didn't want to, guess what? I didn't want to write Vim script in order to write my tests. So of course I wrote my tests in Go and then used Go's fantastic automated testing to make all this work. So govim.test is actually a program. When you compile a test in Go, you actually get a sort of a test binary. So that's why I'm referring to it as govim.test. It's just a way of distinguishing it from govim, which was on the previous slide. Vim, the actual instance of Vim or gvim, doesn't matter, we test both, is represented by the icon on the left-hand side here. Now this Vim in sort of teletype down at the bottom here is actually a separate special program that I've called Vim and just sort of abused the name. Is that what I want to do is I don't want to be, as I said, all these tests are automated. So what I want to do is I want to effectively give the test a script and run through that script as if it were a human. And so that's where I'm using this special Vim program here. And I just pass it commands, and we'll see an example of this in a second, as if I was a human effectively. And then it drives via the govim test binary Vim, which then effectively will call back through govim, perhaps to the language server. And so you see this whole dance going on the whole time. So as I said, each of these sort of scenarios is a script, and it's a test script. I'll sort of link, that's linked on the next slide there. Each script itself runs an isolated instance of Vim or gvim, doesn't matter, plus govim plus gopls, because that's effectively the suite of things we're testing here. As I said, this within each script, the Vim command can be used to drive Vim or gvim, and we'll see an example of that on the next slide. And so then my testing effectively works by making assertions about, well, what state is Vim in? And I can prod it by saying, well, tell me what value you've got in this setting, for example. Or I can save files to disk and make sure that the file then looks correct, i.e. against some sort of golden reference in some way, shape, or form. For example, formatting. So here's a good example of a script. So let's just run through it here. You can imagine this is like a shell script, okay? And if you read it as a shell script, you won't go too far wrong. So the first line there is a comment, the ensure the default is go imports. So what I want to test here is that when Vim starts up and loads govim, that actually there's a global variable that is defaulted to a particular value, because that's what my users will expect. I've added some sort of documentation to that effect, for example, right? So Vim is this special command within one of these scripts where I can then just do something in Vim. And in this situation, I'm evaluating an expression. You can see the expra command there. And these sort of separate commands within Vim here are very, very similar to the Vim channel commands. If you look at the Vim channel documentation, there are like 5 or 6 redraw, expra, call to call a function, x in order to run an x command. There's literally 5 or 6. And so I'm simply emulating that here in a command line fashion. So I can just drive this Vim instance that is running off to the left here from the command line by just executing these commands that just happens to execute over a JSON over a socket and then JSON over a socket again. Simple, it's really as simple as that. But it now condenses down to this super simple script here where I can just say, well, imagine I said, well, tell me what the value of this variable is here. Then I'm making an assertion there on the third line, stood it out that it actually is the value of go imports, a string. Okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to load a file. You can see vimx. I'm running an x command there, which is to edit, load, file.go, and then I'm going to run vimx and then w to save the file. And so now what I'm testing is that an original file that I had which is badly formatted, when I save it in Vim, it should trigger the format on save behavior that I showed you in the demo. And then we're going to comp, as in compare, file.go with file.go.imports as did it do its job. So what are these files? This is just, this is called a text tar format where it's part of the test script setup here. You can specify a list of files within the same script, and they effectively get exploded onto disk when the test actually runs, so that those commands you saw on the previous slide actually work. So you can just ignore the go.mod at the top there. The file.go.orig is the one that is badly formatted, and you can see this is actually just badly formatted Go code here. This is what it should look like at the bottom. So the things that change are that we get this constant block here gets properly formatted, but also we get the import of OS added as well, which is the go imports behavior that I showed. So does this actually work? Oops. Oh dear. Okay, that's very bad. I don't have the next slide. Okay, so all it was going to actually be the output from this test. So I'll make sure that those slides are available. Those additional 2 or 3 slides are available. So then when this actually runs, this comparison at the end here would have failed if actually the result then wasn't correct, i.e. it wasn't the correctly formatted result there. So in this way, we have pretty good coverage actually. On the GitHub page itself, there are installation instructions if you want to use Vim 8 packages, pathogen, etc. We've got tests that are in place there that verify that each of those installation methods works as we've documented them, because that's kind of useful. You don't want to break your installation method so that new users can't come along and use it. All of the features that gopls currently offers, there are tests in place for those as well. And the one thing we don't have coverage for at the moment is things like hover, but that's because Vim itself doesn't actually allow you to test or simulate where the mouse is. I think Bram is working on adding that because there's no Vim test coverage for that in the first place either. And as soon as we get that, we'll be able to add those tests in to govim as well. So that's pretty much it. As I said, this is kind of the key diagram as far as it's concerned architecturally. This is the key diagram as far as the testing is concerned with this kind of script-based approach to driving Vim. And then this is an example of what one of those tests actually look like. And you saw what the demo is really very uninteresting. It's just me editing Go code and with a lot of features that everybody has sort of come to expect from their editors and IDEs. There's a whole list of thank you there's for people who have actually sort of kind of helped me to get to where I am today. But other than that, if you've got any questions, I'll happily take those now. Sorry, I ran on a bit long there. Hey.
As far as my understanding of language server, usually it's a language client that interact with the language server. So how different is govim different to other language clients?
It is just, so govim is the language client. So in the specification of a language server, it just describes things abstractly in terms of a server and a client. It's simply in order to distinguish between the two sides. Now the server is the one that has the answers and the client is the one asking the questions. But the client also has capabilities as well. So whoever is asking the questions, if I can put it like that, is the client. And in this situation, it's govim.
Does it mean that it's easy to also, for govim to talk to other language server?
Spot on. And that's exactly kind of what I'm testing, is that there's nothing Go specific. Yeah. Well, let me just say it is 95% language agnostic right now. But what I wanted to do was to try, because remember the only reason I'm doing this to start with is to test the hypothesis that it's easier to write Vim plugins in Go. Then I thought, oh, it's actually really easy for me to connect to the new Go language server, and honestly, the code to do that is like 10 lines. So then I'm automatically a client because I'm reusing a whole lot of their code and I'm reusing the client implementation, etc. So I add 10 lines of code and I'm talking to the language server. So I'm thinking, well, hang on, this is pretty easy now because now I'm writing in my favorite language and I'm writing a Vim plugin and it's 95% language agnostic. So whilst I'm focusing on Go at the moment in order to primarily to help iterate on the Go language server side of things, it will probably be the case, and if you look in the FAQ, I talk about this, that what falls out of the bottom is actually language agnostic, and you could make it point at any language server, and it work for any language. But yeah, that's not my focus at the moment. So if you were to go and look at the project and think, oh, this is all very Go specific, kind of, that's what I'm optimizing for at the moment. But it's not to say that someone might just copy paste it and say, oh, hey, I've now made this language agnostic. I'd have no problem with that. My focus is just on Go right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
That was great, thank you. So, I mean, this whole concept of a language server is relatively new to me. I think I get the pattern.
It was to me until about a month ago.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Well, I think I get the pattern you're describing, and it's good to hear that actually the plugin is ultimately sort of fairly generic, actually, right, from a language server perspective, because that was sort of a question mark in my mind. So I know it sounds like you're a Go guy, so it totally makes sense why you're focusing on that. Do you happen to know how widespread this language server concept is amongst other mainstream languages? Is this
massive?
Okay.
Yeah. TypeScript is one of the largest examples that comes to mind.
Okay.
I think someone may be able to tell me whether it was actually the first language server. It may well have been, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm getting 1 or 2 nods. And its use within TypeScript is prolific because it's having to sort of being in this situation. Where are we? This situation with TypeScript would be very, very hairy because TypeScript as a language is very large. Mm-hmm. Go as a language is very, very small. And so this situation was somewhat manageable, but from a maintainability and extensibility perspective, it's just not sustainable. Sure. But with TypeScript as a language, it is a very large language. And so to actually write a tool that works with TypeScript, the language, requires quite a bit of effort relative to Go. I'm not saying it's impossible. So the whole concept of a language server became very, very attractive then. It's natively supported within Visual Studio Code, which, as you saw from one of the earlier slides as well, is just skyrocketing in terms of popularity. So yeah, there is. This is the direction, to my mind, that things are going to happen. Not because, it's Microsoft who came up with a language server spec. No, but because of all of those reasons. I didn't mention the word Microsoft at all in there. Sure. It's about improving the community tools that exist out there. And a large part of that comes from consolidating development effort and coordinating it better. And the whole pattern that the language server intends, maybe it intends, or maybe it's just sort of like a nice derivative of it, just enables that to happen.
Sure. And in principle, it sounds like the only portion of your plugin which would need to change to enable it for example, TypeScript, is to replace the starting of the Go language server with a TypeScript one instead, right? Plus, of course, all of the automated tests you've written, which wouldn't be relevant anymore, right? You need some different tests, but that's
correct.
For a different reason.
Exactly. Yeah. But that was also the thinking as well behind having a quick and easy way to write these automated tests. Yeah. And I'm just not optimizing for it right now because there would be significant amounts of reorganization needed within the plugin. It would be trivial for somebody to say, and here is a directory structure of tests that verify that everything works with TypeScript.
Sure.
Done.
Sure. Cool. No, that's great. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you. It was a very interesting talk.
Thank you.
I really liked how a modern, very modular approach can be leveraged towards this language server thing, which is catching up very fast. I had a question about the last bit, which was asked by both of the people who asked the questions. So you said that it's 95% language agnostic, and there's some things that need to probably change to talk to other language servers. But then there might also be a disadvantage of having Go as a dependency, or am I reading it wrong? Because all remote servers may not have Go.
No, true. So let's just go back to the sort of the critical. No, I'm going the wrong direction here. This one here, right? So this is just a program that runs, right? How I get hold of that program is kind of part of the detail of it. So at the moment, govim takes care of all of that. It has go please as effectively a dependency, and it gets a specific version of that dependency, compiles it, and runs it. So part of my hedging with like the 95% answer is that clearly isn't the case for all languages. So taking TypeScript as an example, you're going to need Node, and the list goes on, right? So that's where it starts to get a bit more hairy and specific in language terms, because you might need some sort of runtime. The great thing from a Go perspective is that actually you don't even need Go installed. You can actually pre-compile these binaries and download binaries for your OS and architecture, and they will just work. So again, this is kind of like a few steps down the line. If we didn't even want to have Go as a dependency for govim and go please, fine. It would be kind of weird because you're developing Go, but if you get what I mean. So you're going to need Go installed in order to do that. But theoretically speaking, you wouldn't need it in order to run govim and go please. But you're making exactly the point, which is exactly the reason why I did not want to do it, because otherwise you open a whole can of worms. And I'm thinking all I'm trying to iterate on at the moment very quickly is making sure that go please does what it says on the tin from a Go perspective.
Thank you.
But if anybody wants to sort of fork it and just have a go, then please do.
Hi. At the beginning, I think there was a slide that made reference to a GitHub repo host to do with Microsoft. And
Yep.
I was just wondering, so Microsoft's involvement, is it just the fact that they've formalized a specification for the language server, or have they actually written anything?
So Microsoft effectively is own the right word, TypeScript, or are the curators of it, or whatever the correct phrase would be. And so if is being suggested the language server spec was largely a derivative of TypeScript, it is entirely separate. It's just a specification. They do have some reference implementations as well, I think, for, is my language server compliant? They have a client that will perform a whole load of tests on your server, or vice versa, if you wanted to. And so from that perspective, I think they are just stewards of the spec. But the thing is, there's a huge amount of feedback being given as the language server is becoming more popular. So taking Rebecca and Ian as an example, they are feeding back sort of Go specific stuff, which will, in my opinion, lead to changes in the spec in some way, shape or form. Because there are some things in the way that Go works that actually means when you make a request to the language server, you really, really need to actually be providing an extra bit of context with every single call you make to just tell the language server, oh, here I am, effectively, in loose terms. So the spec is not set in stone. They are continually making changes to the spec, but in a backwards compatible way, understandably. So I don't know the specific details of it, but I think there is this concept of there being extensions that can be defined to the language server, simply because they want that you have to maintain backwards compatibility. You can't just trash the spec and then all editors break. You need to move forward with this stuff. So that's, I think, where this concept of extensions come in. But please, I'm absolutely zero. I know less about the language server than I do Vim script, and that's very little. So the link there is probably most helpful.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Just a quick question. I was wondering how long has this taken you in terms of, you kind of answered like a month ago, but in terms of hours, that seems like a pretty complicated stuff you've done here.
The addition of the Go Please language server support was, okay, I said it's 10 lines. It's 10 lines of actual code, I think, roughly speaking. There's some copy paste of some pre-existing language server client definitions that exist there. The trickier bit actually was writing effectively the plugin host. I think that's probably the correct term. So Vim, if we just go back to the slide here very quickly. So Vim obviously needs to start govim in order to get going. So I've got a very thin shim file, which is actually written in Vim script. And that has taken the bulk of my time to write correct Vim script in that very thin shim. Actually, from that point onwards, I found the Vim 8 channel stuff fantastically easy to use. So then the only thing you've got to do is make sure that you can debug either side of it fairly carefully. So just to make sure you're not sending invalid JSON. And Vim has got a trivial way to do that because you can just write the channel log and it writes it as it goes. So then you just got to make sure that your side does it as well. And then you can spot where things are going wrong. I got the event model wrong like 2 or 3 times within govim because Vim is just single threaded. Whereas govim actually can and needs to, in a number of situations, do things asynchronously as far as Vim is concerned. And Go makes that trivial, but making sure you then get back onto the correct event loop as far as Vim is concerned, I just got wrong to start with. I think I've kind of got it right now. At least, as I said, I'm using this 100% of the time, and the bugs I'm now finding are actually within Go Please. So not my code for now. I'm sure we will find some. But in terms of hours, I don't know. Literally, I think I've been working on this as a sort of side project for the last month and a half. I don't know what it represents in terms of lines of code. I've copied a fair amount of code from the Go Tools team as far as the language server client is concerned. So subtract that, I really don't know what it looks like. Thousands?
And another quick question: the govim test syntax, is it your own?
No,
it wasn't completely.
No,
changed,
this
right?
is actually something that. So there's the link to the test script format there. Actually, it's in Roger Pepe's GitHub repository, but actually this originated within the Go repo itself. So if anyone who's not familiar, Go is the language itself, but there is a Go tool as well that allows you to work with the language. So build, install, produce documentation, whatever it might be. And that all happens via the Go command. And so the Go command, as you can sort of imagine, needs to be very, very well tested to make sure that it as a command line tool doesn't break in some way, shape or form. Now, the previous way of testing that was fairly horrendous in that there was code written to run the Go code and then just check in code that it had done the right thing, etc. Whereas actually what you really wanted to do was to write something close to shell script and then make your assertions there. But nobody wanted to write any of this stuff in Bash. And so this test script language here is something that Russ Cox, who is the technical owner of Go now, developed when he was doing a major re-architecture of the Go command. And he just kept that internal because there's effectively a burden. As soon as you give it to other people to use, then it becomes a maintenance load. So he kept it internal. But Roger, Pepe, Daniel, Marty, and I have been sort of maintaining this external copy with all the correct attribution, etc., of test script, and we use it the whole time for testing all of our command line stuff because it is, well, you can see it's a very, very natural, and it's totally extensible as well. So it's not closed wall. You can see the Vim command clearly doesn't exist in just the standard test script. So there's a way in which I've defined that the Vim command is X, and this is what it does, etc. So it's not specific to Go the language at all. So it's very, very reusable for that reason.
Thank you. I don't know. I think we're running out of time, but
yes. Sorry, I ran
questions.
on.
I just want to thank you all for coming today, and hope you have enjoyed. And if you have, send feedback on meetup.com, and we'll probably try to organize another event as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Thank you.